So when Neil Channing's on Talking Points, it's a bit like racing TV's equivalent of just a minute or just 2 minutes, because he's had absolutely no advance warning of the topics because he refuses to give himself advance warning of the topics. And then he has to talk enough nonsense without hesitation, deviation or repetition. God. But he's pretty good at it. Very rarely get a word in edgeways and always goes over the bell. So here we go. The Jason Watson ban. He got 7 days for failing to make sufficient effort on a horse who missed the break in a 2-year-old race at Nottingham, was allowed to coast home and passed one. Should he have been banned? He appeals on Thursday.
I sort of feel like they've been a bit overzealous, and he'll do well in his appeal. Having said that, is there a wider question? I mean, obviously, clearly in this particular instance, there's no consistency in the stewarding, because this kind of thing happens all the time, and people generally don't get banned for it. Clearly, it's an inexperienced horse that's lost all chance of winning in the first 10 strides, and it's a bit ridiculous.
The horse was beaten 26 lengths.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a sprint race as
well.
Yeah,
of course. And there is a question of whether the stewarding has to be different when you're dealing with inexperienced horses than when you're dealing with super experienced horses. And also, we've talked in the past about, the consistency. This was clearly not a gambling thing. It wasn't a non-trying thing or anything like that. But we had, the example of the Gosden horse. I hope you put it in your tracker because it won next time out. We talked about that, and I think that was last time I was on, and there was very much the idea that, it's okay. You're allowed to sort of not knock them about first time up. That's just an accepted thing. And Gosden sort of came out and said,
but let's get back on point here.
What I'm saying is, should
he be given 7 days?
No, he shouldn't really have been given 7 days. No, I think he'll be fine on appeal.
So here's the other point. I think his strongest case in the appeal is that on Newbury, the Saturday before, the same thing happened on a different horse.
Exactly.
Jason Watson
So there
again.
was an inconsistency.
And they said to him, why did you do that? And he said X, and they went fine, noted the explanation. Now, if they'd given him an official warning, or if they documented it as an official caution, different kettle of fish, but they didn't. So therefore, at Newbury it was fine, and then 3 days later at Nottingham, not fine, you get 7 days.
Sure, and obviously, we don't have centralised stewarding, and it's a different bunch of people on a different day.
We've got professional stewards now, so we're getting close to centralised
stewarding. True. But, it's a different bunch of people on a different day, isn't it? So, there's no consistency. I didn't really agree with him saying that the BHA have got it in for him. I mean, he might be feeling that the morning after, but I think that might be a bit strong.
Sometimes you think I'm victimising you, but I'm not. I love you, really.
Yeah, I often think that.
Drinking on course. Now, this was prompted really by the sort of reaction to some shots on Sky, actually, of people having a good time at Windsor.
I think Matt Chapman was coming up to them with a microphone, and they looked like a bunch of lads that had a few bevies.
I thought it was,
Well, what do people think that people go to Windsor for? You go on the boat, you have a couple of drinks on the boat, you turn up, you sit in the champagne bar, you have a few.
The point that we're arguing here is whether the reaction to drinking on course, or a lads drinking culture on course, is one that should or shouldn't be promoted, because it got rather a po-faced.
Well, I mean, there's kind of.
So I've declared my hand already.
I guess there's slightly two sides to it, isn't there? On the one hand, we've spent a year saying, oh my God, the racecourses can't make any money because they've got no spectators. And then the second some spectators turn up, we're like, oh, heavens above, they're not the right kind of spectators. Well, surely they're the perfect kind of spectators for Windsor on a Monday night, because, they come there with a pocket full of money. They're very happy to have a few drinks. They probably have a few bets. They pay a bit of money to get in. At the end of the day, that's the difference between Windsor being a viable racecourse or not, perhaps. Although I think we're coming on to Arc in a minute. Anyway, whatever. But if you want people,
they're not fighting, they're not smashing the place up. They're just having a few drinks.
Exactly. I mean, I guess that's where it comes a little bit. There then becomes the borderline in terms of. Summer nights of people taking a lot of cocaine in the toilet. I'm not talking about the jockeys, talking about the attendees, and coming and having a big punch up after racing. So there is a fine line, obviously. I mean, racing...
You might want to rephrase that.
Racing has... yeah, sorry, I was thinking about the Eurovision then. Racing has become... it has become a little bit... that they are sort of overly dependent. We had 6 race meetings on a Saturday yesterday. We've got 2 on a Sunday today. I think that's totally ridiculous. But partly people will say it's because the racecourses need to get these groups of young lads in getting drunk on a Saturday afternoon. They won't come and do that on Sunday for some reason. And that's part of the business model. And
back on track. Next one.
Oh, okay. All right.
The next talking point is ARC, the racecourse company, which has come under fire this week from... it was prompted by a study that was written by Mark Kershaw, the ex-managing director of Newbury, who'd done his own figures to suggest what he would describe as excessive profiteering by ARC relative to their relatively meagre prize money on the whole. Now, ARC came back strong and hard and called this an extremely irresponsible and a badly researched piece of journalism, in their words. But again, what it's served to do is inflame the debate between racecourses and so said horsemen at a time when their own negotiations are at quite a delicate stage. Neil.
Well, it wasn't a massive surprise that ARC came back strongly. I mean, they weren't going to say, "That's great, thanks very much. Yes, we've absolutely been having it off during the pandemic." But at the end of the day, they are a company. They have shareholders. I think the shareholders, funnily enough, the shareholders feature quite heavily in the Sunday Times Rich list today. So that was maybe a bad coincidence for them that all happened in the same week. But what you could say, what are they doing wrong? They're running a business. Whether some people think that there's excess profiteering or whatever, they legally are obliged to do the best that they can for their shareholders. I guess the real question is that Mark Kershaw did this research, which he admitted was fairly back of the envelope, but coming from an informed source because he has experience in this field. But the reason that it has to be back of the envelope is because there's no there's no opaqueness. We don't know.
No transparency.
No transparency. That was the word I was looking for. Yeah, sorry. We don't know what the media writes and who gets what, and we should know much more about it. It's all right for the horsemen to moan about it, but they can't really prove anything because they haven't got the actual figures. So I did hear Lydia Hislop was on your podcast saying that the horsemen should employ somebody full time to get the real story. Otherwise, they're just shouting into the void, really.
Well, the point she made was they had somebody. They didn't really like the cut of his jib,
yes.
So they got rid of him, and they didn't really replace him.
And now they're left shouting into the void, which is not really going to do them much good.
OK, so crowds are back on the racecourse this week. Numbers are capped at 4,000 until the 21st of June. Royal Ascot falls within that period. I think they were hoping for a little more. What they've got is to have to plan for 4,000 a day in the vague hope that the government might say to them, "Oh, would you be a test event, please? And maybe you'll have up to 10,000. They're in a very delicate and slightly awkward position because they can't really lobby that hard for it. They've got a plan for the event. It's just 4,000 a day. It's going to look slim pickings, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it looks like a sort of Terminal 5 at Heathrow, doesn't it, Ascot? It's a massive stand. 4,000 is, people can have social distancing times 20 if they want to spread out. It means that the Heath, the bit in the new enclosure, that's all closed. There's not much going on other than hospitality and the more expensive end of the ticketing. I see the bookmakers were complaining as well that I think they're allowing something like 12 punters. I can't remember what it was. 12. Something like there weren't enough bookmakers. Basically, they're saying that one guy's got 7 pitches of I think there's 40 bookmakers being allowed in the meeting, which didn't seem that many for the crowd. But I don't know what they can do. I think, you know, the situation is changing day by day. Touch wood, the Indian variant doesn't turn out to be as bad as people were saying.
Well, they think that the second dose of the jab gives you a 66% chance, don't they, with the Indian variants?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the average age of the people who are, I know they're not running a membership scheme at Ascot this year, but people that come to the Royal Enclosure, you know, they're likely to be quite highly jabbed. Yeah, it's very difficult. I don't know what the answer is to that, really.
But they can't. There's not much Ascot can really do other than sit and wait and hope that somebody says, "Well, actually, why don't you trial this for us, and you can have another 4,000 or 5,000 people a day." That would be quite nice if that did happen, because then your process for getting from 4,000 to 10,000,
sure,
you could be quite creative about who you then ask and get a few more owners as syndicate members in, a few more, you know, walk-ins, members of the public, whatever. It's just democratise the process a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Ascot have had plenty of time to know this is going to be the situation. Presumably they're still copping on some insurance here, and by the time we get round to Goodwood, presumably we'll be kind of back to normal.
Well, I think at the moment it's pretty difficult for anyone to get insured for anything, certainly some sporting events further down the track. Burley Horse Trials, for example, has had to be cancelled this year because they can't get a policy.
Right.
And they're not willing to take the risk in case we get wave number 4 or whatever come September. Iain Jardine, the trainer this week, has said that he's being victimised because the 4 horses which were part of a so-said gamble at Carlisle were all defeated. He says they weren't part of a gamble at all. This is some confection designed to besmirch his reputation. Now, from your point of view, what's the likelihood of that?
Well, I read it and I just thought that's a bit ridiculous, really. I mean, you know, I'm guessing what happened is somebody saw that Iain Jardine had a bunch of runners on the same day and thought, oh, blimey, I remember that happening a few Sundays ago. Why don't I just stick a few multiples on in case they get backed into ridiculous prices?
Is that somebody, or is that the bookmakers saying, hang on a minute, we've had our bottoms bitten by an Iain Jardine gamble in the last few weeks. We're not having that again.
Well, I mean, you could say that, but at the end of the day, the horses still opened up bigger than, you know, they got backed into. So there were some bookmakers or somebody on Betfair prepared to lay them above the prices that maybe they could have been. The way they ran, the people that laid them did the right thing, obviously.
Didn't we see this with the DJ Jeffries quartet
a
few weeks ago, where clearly there was no orchestrated plot?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, you could easily see somebody waking up and thinking, I might as well have a lucky 15 of these Iain Jardine ones.
But is that enough to wipe all their prices
out? How many people need to do it? You know, if half a dozen people wake up and think the same thing, which wouldn't be inconceivable. I mean, that previous Iain Jardine thing on a Sunday was fairly high profile. Was Monday, wasn't it? This happened on a quiet Monday. You know, half a dozen people around the country waking up and thinking, I tell you what, I'm going to have an Iain Jardine lucky 15. You know, at these kind of prices, it doesn't take much to shorten them up. I mean, I see there was a gamble on a Joseph Churt 2-year-old yesterday, and there was a lot of talk about how it had been 33s in the morning. Looked on Betfair, somebody had 25 quid at 25 to 1. I mean, it's not exactly Barney Curly, is it?
It certainly isn't. Well, there's not very much that is Barney Curly in truth. So, yeah, there you are. Geldings. Rahan, the winner of the Sandy Lane, can't run in the Commonwealth Cup because he's a gelding.
That's the second time that's happened.
Yeah,
recently.
Creative Force is the other one who can't run. So Commonwealth Cup is restricted to colts and fillies.
The Commonwealth Cup is a brilliant race.
Lee Mostyn's written about it in the paper. He says it's snooty that geldings aren't allowed to run in the
the Commonwealth Cup is a brilliant addition to the programme, for sure. Everybody thinks it's a huge success. Do
they?
I think
does everyone think it's a huge success?
I think the last few years everyone said what a great race it was.
When you get a field of 7 in this year's King's Stand and a field of 9 in the Jubilee, you might think otherwise.
No, of course. But what I was going to say was that it's not a race that, you know, harks back to the 17th century, is it? I mean, it's not like changing it destroys history if they were to change it for this particular race. So I don't, you know, for me, I don't think it's not a race where you can turn around and say, well, we can't possibly make that change because that throws hundreds of years of history out of the window.
But it's not a question.
It's not like changing the St. Ledger to 4-year-olds or something like that.
But it's not a question of history for history's sake, is it? There's a reason why geldings aren't allowed in the Commonwealth Cup and why they are allowed in the Diamond Jubilee. It's because the foundation stones of the industry, the horses that the industry decrees should be its stallions, are horses that have excelled in their classic generation, which is why they are called the classics. So the Commonwealth Cup is supposed to be the 3-year-old counterpoint for the horses that don't stay classic distances.
Yes.
And there's a reason why the Derby and the 2,000 guineas are for colts only, and that is because these are supposed to be...
To test out horses to find who's the best to breed.
These are going to be the founding fathers of the next generation. That's the idea. Anyway.
Yeah, I take all of those points, but is the Commonwealth Cup in that, echelon? I don't think so. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a brilliant race. I really like the Commonwealth Cup, but... was it really designed to test out the sprinters of the future?
Well, there is a specific part of the pattern that's been siphoned off to direct horses to this path and to take them out of the classics. So, to that end, whilst I agree that geldings should be allowed in all the older horse races, no problem. And I actually think there's a good case for geldings to be allowed in the Arc.
Yeah.
If you're not going to have geldings in the 2,000 guineas, then I don't think they should be in the Commonwealth Cup.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I don't have a strong view on that, but I definitely would be thinking you shouldn't have... I can't see any reason why you would ever want to have geldings in the classics. I don't know whether that makes me just an old traditionalist. Or
it makes you snooty, apparently.
Oh, no. I don't like to be snooty.
No. There's only room
I didn't mind those guys.
There's only room for one of us on the show,
I didn't mind those guys having a drink at Windsor. I didn't get sniffy about that.
No. Point 7. Go on. What do you want to rant about?
I was only... I mean, just... We're going to have some racing in November this year, flat racing on the turf. There's going to be massive Group 1 races in October. Probably all of those will be run on soft and heavy ground. And people tell me you can't possibly fiddle around with any of that because of the positioning of the Arc and the positioning of Champions Day and the positioning of the Breeders' Cup. And I kind of get all of those things. But the reason that the season is, virtually the whole year these days, and the reason that we seem to end up running when we should be doing jumps racing at the end of the year is because we have a little gap between Doncaster starting and the Craven where people sort of think, well, there isn't much good racing, some people would say. And we have Saturdays, and I enjoyed yesterday. I enjoyed the racing, and some smaller stables won some races. No disrespect to anyone, but David Evans won a Group 2, and there were a couple of doubles from stables that are not in the top 20 in the prize money list. And it was good racing, and actually, people like Charlie Appleby and Mark Johnston and didn't really have brilliant days yesterday. Richard Fahey, with their hundreds of horses, they didn't have lots of winners yesterday, and it gave somebody else a chance. But we had a meeting at Goodwood where we only had one race which had 8 runners. We had the same at Newmarket. There were 6 races, 6 meetings across the country. Racing going off every 2 seconds. There was Ireland as well, which was brilliant. Today we've got Fakenham and Nottingham. What the hell is going on? I understand that the racecourses have got too much power and the fixture list isn't in the control of the BHA and all this kind of thing. But, can't somebody just bang everybody's head together and make the sport not be a joke?
Well, there were tons of runners at Lingfield yesterday, where they were racing, as Jamie Spencer described it, in jump racing ground, and for about £2.5 a race.
Yeah, people seem to love that. Yeah.
Amazing, isn't it? There you go. Those were this week's talking points. Subscribe to Racing TV to be notified when more Luck on Sunday videos are appearing online. And don't forget to join me for the show every Sunday morning from 9 o'clock with the best guests.